William Walker Atkinson's The New Psychology, Its Message, Principles, and Practice. Chapter 3 was Egoism, Not Egotism. This is Chapter 4, Consciousness and Beyond. It comes as a surprise to the average person to be informed that at least 95% of his mental activities are performed on planes of his mind below and above the field of consciousness. The average person is in the habit of thinking of his mind as being limited entirely to the conscious field, whereas that conscious field is but little more than the field of vision of the microscope as compared with the space beyond it from which emerge and disappear the organisms in the drop of water placed in the object slide, or the field of vision of the telescope as compared with the expanse of the heavens toward which the tube is pointed. Just as there are degrees of heat and cold beyond the field of our instruments, light vibrations below and above the visible spectrum, sounds below and above our capacity for registering them, so are their mental operations constantly being performed out of the narrow field of consciousness, which we have been fondly considering as our mind. In perhaps no other branch has the new psychology made such rapid strides as in this bringing into recognition of the vast area of the mind of man beyond the conscious field. Excuse me. When we consider the accepted ideas on the subject entertained by the students of psychology of today, as compared with the ideas of only a few decades back, we may begin to realize the great strides in this branch of thought. Leibniz was the first great thinker among the Western people to call attention to the fact of the extent and importance of the out-of-conscious mental planes, although the Hindu philosophies are full of references to it. And after Leibniz's time, the progress of the idea was very slow, and it is only within the last 20 years that the textbooks on psychology have given to the subject the attention it merited. Today, it is fully recognized by the best authorities. The following quotations from some of the best authorities may surprise some of you who are not familiar with the idea. Lewis says, "The teaching of most modern psychologists is that consciousness forms but a small item in the total of psychical processes. Unconscious sensations, ideas, and judgments are made to play a great part in their explanations. It is very certain that in every conscious volition, every act that is so characterized, the larger part of it is quite unconscious. It is equally certain that in every perception there are unconscious processes of reproduction and inference. There is a middle distance of subconsciousness and a background of unconsciousness. Hamilton says, the sphere of our consciousness is only a small circle in a center of a far wider sphere of action and passion, of which we are only conscious through its effects. Taine says, mental events imperceptible to consciousness are far more numerous than the others. And of the world which makes up our being, we only perceive the highest points, the lighted up peaks of a continent whose lower levels remain in the shade. Beneath ordinary sensations are their components, that is to say, the elementary sensations, which must be combined into groups to reach our consciousness. Outside a little luminous circle lies a large ring of twilight, and beyond this an indefinite night. But the events of this twilight and this night are as real as those within the luminous circle." Excuse me once again. Maudsley says, "Examine closely and without bias the ordinary mental operations of daily life, and you will surely discover that consciousness has not 1/10 part of the function therein which it is commonly assumed to have. In every conscious state there are at work conscious, subconscious, and infraconscious energies, the last as indispensable as the first. Kay says, formerly consciousness was regarded as being coextensive with mind, the mind being held to be conscious of all its own activities, of all the changes or modifications that take place in it. Leibniz was the first to confute this opinion and to establish the doctrine that there are energies always at work and modifications constantly taking place in the mind, of which we are quite unconscious. Since his time, this opinion has been gradually gaining ground, and now it is a generally received doctrine in philosophy. Carpenter says, the psychologists of Germany have taught that much of our mental work is done without consciousness. Hamilton says of the idea that the fact of such latent modifications is now established beyond irrational doubt, and on the supposition of their reality we are able to solve various psychological phenomena otherwise inexplicable. Halleck says, it must not be supposed that the mind is at any time conscious of all its materials and powers. At any moment we are not conscious of 1,000th part of what we know. It is well that such is the case. For when we are studying an object under a microscope, trying to memorize poetry, demonstrating a geometrical proposition, or learning a Latin verb, we should not want all we know of history or physics or images of the persons, trees, dogs, birds, or horses that we remembered to rush into our minds at the same time. If they did so, our mental confusion would be indescribable. Between the perception and the recall, the treasures of memory are, metaphorically speaking, away from the eye of consciousness. How these facts are preserved, before they are reproduced by the call of memory, consciousness can never tell us. An event may not be thought of for 50 years, and then it may suddenly appear in consciousness. As we grow older, the subconscious field increases. When we first begin to walk, we were conscious of every step. Later, we can talk about the deepest subject while we are walking, and not even think of the steps we are taking. We sometimes wind our watches without being conscious of the operation, as is shown by the fact that we again test them to see if we have wound them. Professor Gates has said, at least 90% of our mental life is subconscious. If you will analyze your mental operations, you will find that conscious thinking is never a continuous line of consciousness, but a series of conscious data with great intervals of subconsciousness. We sit and try to solve a problem and fail. Suddenly an idea dawns that leads to a solution of the problem. The subconscious processes were at work. We do not volitionally create our own thinking. It takes place in us. We are more or less passive recipients. We cannot change the nature of a thought, but we can, as it were, guide the ship by a moving of the helm. And Schofield says, our conscious mind, as compared with the unconscious mind, has been likened to the visible spectrum of the sun's rays, as compared to the invisible part which stretches indefinitely on either side. We know now that the chief part of heat comes from the ultra-red rays that show no light, and the main part of the chemical changes in the vegetable world are the results of the other end of the spectrum, which are equally invisible to the eye and are recognized only by their potent effects. Indeed, as these invisible rays extend indefinitely on both sides of the visible spectrum, so we may say that the mind includes not only the visible or conscious part, and what we have called the subconscious, but also the supraconscious mind that lies at the other end. All those regions of higher soul and spirit life, of which we are only at times vaguely conscious, but which always exist, and link us on to veritable verities on the one side, as surely as the subconscious mind links us with the body on the other. Sir Oliver Lodge has written a remarkable statement regarding the out-of-conscious states or planes of the mind, Let us imagine, then, as a working hypothesis, that our subliminal self, the other and greater part of us, is in touch with another order of existence, and that it occasionally is able to communicate, or somehow, perhaps unconsciously, transmit to the fragment in the body something of the information accessible to it. This guess, if permissible, would contain a clue to a possible explanation of clairvoyance. We should then, like icebergs, be floating in an ocean, with only a fraction exposed to sun and air and observation. The rest, by far the greater bulk, 11/12ths, submerged in a connecting medium, submerged and occasionally in subliminal or subaqueous contact with others, while still the peaks, the visible bergs, are far separate. One cannot but sympathize to some extent with those philosophers who urge that the progress of humanity has been achieved by attention to a development of our full consciousness, and that reversion to the subconscious or to dream states is a step back. It must be noted, however, that the adjective subliminal, as we understand it, is not suggestive of subordinate or subsidiary, but is far more nearly related to sublime, a statement which, considered objectively, the philosophers in question would probably disallow. If they mean that for the active and practical concerns of life, consciousness must be our guide and our advisor, I am with them. But if they mean, as I am sure they do not when pressed, that inspiration is attained through consciousness, or that it is unlawful and unfruitful to investigate the subconscious, where, I suggest, lie the roots of the connection between mind and matter, then I must join issue with them. So might an iceberg, glorying in its crisp solidity and sparkling pinnacles, resent attention paid to its submerged subliminal supporting region, or to the saline liquid out of which it arose, and into which in due course it will someday return. We feel that we are greater than we know. Or, reversing the metaphor, we might liken our present state to that of the hulls of ships submerged in a dim ocean among strange beasts, propelled in a blind manner through space, proud perhaps of accumulating many barnacles of decoration, only recognizing our destination by bumping against the dock wall, and with no cognizance of the deck and the cabins and the spars and the sails, no thought of the sextant and the compass and the captain, no perception of the lookout on the mast, of the distant horizon, no vision of objects far ahead, dangers to be avoided, destinations to be reached, other ships to be spoken with by other means than bodily contact, a region of sunshine and the cloud, of space, of perception, and of intelligence, utterly unacceptable to the parts below the waterline. There has been much confusion caused by the student of the new psychology by the various terms employed by many of its writers, particularly in connection with these out-of-conscious mental states and regions. Many of the earlier authorities place in one group all the phenomena and activities of the several regions below and beyond the plane of consciousness. This plan causes much confusion because the several attributes attributed to these subjective, subconscious, or subliminal minds, as they are called, are diametrically opposed to each other, and the beginner is soon enmeshed in a web of incompatible facts, ideas, theories. But of late years, there has been a disposition of teachers and writers to observe the classification first observed by some of the Oriental teachers many centuries ago, and at present there is generally recognized that there are two general out-of-conscious regions of planes of the minds, with various subplanes, which are known as the subconscious and superconscious regions, planes, or minds, respectively. Some good teachers and writers still adhere to the old classification, conscious and subconscious, respectively, placing in the latter all of the out-of-conscious phenomena, high and low, but the tendency is in the other direction. You will notice in the quotations that we have given in this chapter that the majority of the authorities recognize the above conscious as well as the below conscious planes or regions of the mind. In the next two chapters, we shall consider these two planes or regions in some detail. What is called the field of consciousness, or conscious mind, is really but a very small part of the mental kingdom of the ego. It is used to receive the report of the senses, to examine, analyze, combine, and use the stored up material of the subconscious as it is brought into the field of consciousness in some degree of order and system, to perform the work of the reason, to choose or decide, to put into operation the will, and in similar ways. It is the great mental clearinghouse where alone certain mental work may be performed. It is the eyepiece of the mental microscope or telescope. It is the great clearing of the mind into which pass the things of the jungle, woods, and canyons, as well as the things coming down from the mountains of the mind. It may be thought of as a spot in the mental area, illumined by the bright light of consciousness, whereby and wherein the ego may examine, decide upon, choose, and act upon the various mental images, ideas, feelings, etc., that are brought before it for consideration and judgment. It is the open court of the mind. From the field of consciousness are passed into the subconscious region many experiences that are to be stored away for the future use of the individual and of the race, which experiences afterward are reproduced in that field of the individual or of the race as feelings, emotions, memories, thoughts, ideas, or other mental material. Into the field of consciousness also pass many new things from the higher or superconscious regions, flashes of inspiration, genius, intuition, and other higher mental material. By keeping this picture of the higher and lower planes of out of consciousness before you, you will be enabled to understand much that has heretofore been dark and confusing. It is of the greatest importance to keep the field of consciousness clean and in good condition, and to keep its chief instruments, the attention and the intellect, in good working order. But at the same time, to regard it as the only region of the mind is a great mistake, and amounts to depriving yourself of certain knowledge much needed by you. The new psychology covers all the regions of the mind, conscious and out of conscious, giving to each its place, and to each its employment and use. It is an all-around science as well as an up-to-date one. Chapter 5 will be the subconscious.